I am back from the psych ward with another banger video. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you might have noticed my accent, or rather lack thereof. I speak with a broadly general North American accent, and I choose American vocabulary and spellings over other variants. So in this video I thought it'd be fun to analyze my idiolect in more detail and talk about how it came about in the first place. If you're wondering about my linguistic background, it's not very interesting. I grew up and have lived my whole life in Poland, in a monolingual Polish household where everyone spoke Polish, and everyone in my family, like 3 generations back, is Polish, from Poland, and speaks Polish, as far as I know. I didn't learn English in my infancy. I started learning it at the age of 7 when I started elementary school, just like every other school child in Poland. I didn't have any friends that I communicated with in English. In fact, I never had a conversation in English outside of a classroom setting until maybe the age of 20. But I was relatively fluent in English by the age of 15. So how did that even happen? Well, the answer is twofold. For one, the elementary school I attended had a pretty high level of education, and that included our English classes. I was good at English, but so was pretty much everyone else in my class. It wasn't until I started high school and compared myself to my new classmates that I realized that I was very lucky to have been taught English well. This really inflated my ego and made me pursue linguistics as a passion, and I guess I wouldn't be here making these videos if it weren't for that, so. I then studied English and linguistics in college, which didn't really meet my expectations, but I digress. The other reason for my improvement in English was that I spent a lot of time watching YouTube. Instead of bonding with my peers like a normal person, I spent my evenings watching Ray William Johnson review viral videos or PewDiePie scream at Happy Wheels. And because I was young and had a peanut-sized brain, it didn't really bother me that I didn't understand some words or phrases. I just sort of filtered them out until I would eventually learn them. This was the biggest reason for my success in learning English. I exposed myself to the language not with the intent of getting my daily dose of comprehensible input or whatever buzzword all the lingo tubers call it these days, but simply because I liked the content, and what language it was in was secondary. I never really had much success with other languages, likely because I tried too hard and also became too old to acquire them via osmosis. With English, I don't ever remember actively sitting down to study it at any moment in my life. I put absolutely zero effort into it, and yet I could speak it fluently, despite never even having an authentic conversation in it. I only started actively trying to improve my language skills when I started college, but it wasn't college that humbled me. It was random people on the internet. It was coincidentally around the same time that I first started talking to people online. And I noticed that most of them were as good as or better than me in English, especially when it came to vocabulary. This made me develop an inferiority complex because how come some rando from like fucking Austria or whatever who studies computer science is better than me when I've been told my whole life that I'm the god of the English language and I'm pursuing it academically? This really opened my eyes to how normalized it is online to be good at English. I do not exaggerate when I say that the vast majority of random non-natives I met online spoke better English than most people I went to college with. And these people are about to get a master's degree in English. Many of them were going to be English teachers. Bleak. It was around the same time I became much more aware of the inner workings of English phonology and could actually describe how certain sounds behaved in certain situations, whereas before I was mostly just winging it. Unfortunately, I have no recordings of me speaking English when I was younger, but this is why I invented a new branch of linguistics called micro-speculative historical linguistics. It involves guessing how I pronounced things when I was younger based on logic, conjecture, and vague distant memories, which isn't that far off from real historical linguistics, to be fair. There's one more question that remains. Why American English in particular? English classes in Europe predominantly teach British English, and mine were no exception. Well, this was part of it. I wanted to be a contrarian and a show-off, but also the narrative spun by my teachers was very off-putting to me. They were basically like, oh, British people are so educated and cultured and pish-posh sips tea, and these Americans, I'm not saying that they're all fat, retarded, and ignorant, but I'm not saying it. And as a young rascal, I heavily despised pretentiousness, and the reverence displayed by my teachers toward British English and everything British in general contributed to my movement away from it. But perhaps the most damning factor was that American English has always sounded just normal to me. Even as a 9-year-old who had zero expertise on English phonology or phonetics and who barely understood the concept of regional language varieties, I could tell that there was something fundamentally goofy about the way that English people talk. And you might be thinking, well, you probably just grew up on American media, hence your bias. And that's not really true. The content creators I watched were from all over the English-speaking world. Canada, Australia, the UK, the US. I mean, I was a huge Harry Potter fan, for God's sake. Though, to be fair, I did read it in Polish, but whatever, you get the idea. Okay, now that I've told you my life story, let's get to some actual linguistics. Let's start with consonants. Alright, moving on. I mean, look, there's nothing really to talk about here. My consonants aren't really different in any way from those of an average North American speaker. But I don't want to leave you with nothing, so I'll talk about what adjustments I have to make compared to my native language in speaking English. English has an alveolar series, which in Polish is denti-alveolar, so a little further forward in the mouth, meaning I have to retract these sounds when speaking English. Compare den with den. The Polish H is more front than the English one, so I have to retract that too. Compare hen with hen. The post-alveolar series is absent in Polish and is stuck between two other series of sounds, so I have to go in the middle. Compare shout with szał and siał. The liquids are completely different too. Polish has a standard clear l, while the English one is usually a velarized l, what I like to call the choking on a dick sound. Compare mil with mil. The rhotic is obviously different too. Post-alveolar, labialized, approximate, I don't know. Every analysis of this sound seems to add more diacritics to it than the last. Compare rock with rak. Also, Polish devoices obstruents word initially, so I need to make sure to avoid that in English. Compare God with gat. And of course, plosives are never aspirated in Polish, but that's pretty obvious. Compare pet with bet. All of these differences contribute to English sounding, in my mind, much less clear and more mumbly than my native language. The retracted t, d, n, s, z compared to t, d, n, s, z. The sibilants sh, zh, ch, j that can't decide whether they're hard like sh, zh, ch, j, or soft like sh, zh, ch, j, so they just hang around in the middle. And the funky l and r compared to the Polish l and the r. It makes pronouncing English quite difficult for me, and I slur my speech a lot when I try to talk fast. Those liquids are especially devious, as I learned in my last video when trying to pronounce literally. Literally. Let's move on and talk about the mind-bending insanity that is the English vowel system. Although some of my vowels may resemble pronunciations observed in certain regional accents, as a whole, my vowel inventory isn't consistent with any one of them. If I could, I would speak with a southern accent because I absolutely love listening to them and find them very pleasant to the ear.
I've cried with the family, because you can feel their pain, because after not knowing something for 21 years.
Unfortunately, they're very hard for me to replicate because they're quite complex with all this vowel breaking and whatnot. I don't even know when to apply it. I know that sit is meant to become set, but no one says this, is, it. Not to mention the diphthongization of the thought vowel, which I don't even have to begin with, but we'll get to that. I'll be using clips from my other videos for demonstration purposes, as I don't really have anything else where my voice is recorded. Starting with simple monophthongs, my kit vowel is standard, and so is my dress vowel. It is most commonly written like this or this. In Spanish it marks stress, in Czech it marks vowel length. I also don't have the pen-pin merger. Let's explore Farloom in 10 languages. Which is why there is an alternative reading for tin, and tin, and tin, and tin, and tin. My strut and foot, however, are dangerously close to each other. Look, I don't know where this anti-digraph cabal came from. Luckily, reading Polish is rather straightforward. Possible merger at some point? Who knows? This is likely because I raise my strut vowel more than the average person, which I know is a newer development in my accent since I actively started doing it a few years ago. A month doesn't even have an integer number of weeks, so you might be wondering what their function is. And since in American English, schwa is merged with strut, I guess that means my schwa is also more close than average? I'm not entirely sure. It's either that or my strut is separate from my schwa, which maybe? Another issue I want to bring up is unstressed kit versus schwa. Now, I'm pretty certain that they're completely merged in my accent because A, I can never tell which to use when transcribing words, and any preconceptions I may have are based purely on spelling. And B, when I do look up a word in a dictionary, I am sometimes surprised that it's transcribed with an unstressed I. The only issue is that if we assume I do merge schwa with strut, it would suggest that I pronounce the prefixes un and in exactly the same way, which I definitely don't. So there must be some allophonic rule going on here. Maybe it's because these prefixes have secondary stress or something. Most commonly used to negate indefinite sentences. Undeterred, I put together a phonology of indefinite undeterred Let's move to the bottom right of the vowel chart, the most interesting place to look at when comparing English accents. Since I have a North American accent, I obviously have the lot-palm merger. However, I also have the cot-cot merger. Another contributing factor was the loss of this vowel, which has been influenced by Chinese quite a lot. For a long time, I didn't know whether I had it, but I'd heard this famous term many times, so I wanted to figure it out. And it's very simple. Take some words from both lexical sets, jumble them up, and see if you can tell which belongs to which set. For me, I would have never in my life assumed that fox and dog could have different vowels. When I was younger, I probably pronounced them something closer to fox and dog, because I remember even in college that someone suggested I should pronounce these words with a more open vowel if I want to sound more American. I was likely influenced by spelling, perceiving words with an O as having a different vowel to those spelled with diphthongs like AU or AW. And this doesn't really map onto the actual distinctions speaker without the merger make. Once I realized that, my life became simpler, and I could confidently pronounce all three sets, lot, palm, and thought, with the same exact vowel. I will admit that there might be some variation in how I pronounce this vowel. I think I tend to raise it before an L, but that's purely allophonic. All but one. What I found really odd though, the same thing may happen if I pronounce foreign words, where I'm more likely to adapt some of my vowels to something resembling the classic 5-vowel system. Napa, Salinas, Monterey, Los Alamos. And the final monophthong is trap, which, as you can hear, is not really a monophthong for me. This vowel has a lot of variation across North America. Wikipedia has this very complex table that summarizes its allophones in North American dialects. For me, it's pretty much always diphthongized and maybe slightly lower than my dress vowel. Okay, so in theory, all this doesn't sound too bad. The head is the main word of a phrase. Bad. Head. Bad. Head. Bad. Head. Bad. Head. But the primary distinction between these two vowels is length and diphthongization rather than quality. Bad. 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 Head. 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 I think in the past I used to avoid this pronunciation before g because it sounded markedly Canadian to me, but I think nowadays I just default to the same a, regardless of the environment. As such, its lexicon and pragmatics are governed, though I doubt I'm 100% consistent with it, and I likely simplify it to a in some cases without noticing. A while back I made a video. It's not common, but it happens, especially when it came to vocabulary. I would assume this is most common in foreign words with this vowel, like I would probably say Latvia over Latvia. We can now take a look at diphthongs. My diphthongs are generally standard with one noticeable exception, so let's save it for the end. Starting with fleece and goose, I honestly don't know how to transcribe them accurately. Everyone seems to do it differently. Whatever. The order of these names seems to be pretty random. The concept behind Venedict won't be anything new to you. I tend to front my goose vowel occasionally, though I'm not very consistent about it. Before you export the layout, there are a few things to do. As for face, I always try to keep it low and avoid that raising that some people do. This is an actual argument that people make with a straight face. Straight face.
Facebook.
Face.
Face.
My goat vowel, similarly to goose, sometimes ventures forward, especially in some words like no, because I don't know. As far as the choice vowel goes, the initial O is quite high for me. So what did our boy take and what did he transform it to? We see a voiced V followed by a voiceless Z. Let's move on to price. In American English, many people do Canadian raising on price, which I used to do, but now I generally avoid it because it sounds a little too valley girl for my comfort. Some suffix signifying an element, right?
If it's a short tunnel, it's no problem, right?
Right.
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 Many speakers also smooth this vowel to a monophthong, though that generally depends on the environment. It's more likely to be monophthongized before voiced consonants, and especially before nasals, which is pretty much the only time that I smooth my price with any degree of consistency, determined by the position at which each glyph connects to the line, as it corresponds to miam 100% of the time. Finally, let's talk about my mouth. The vowel, that is. This is my most noticeable divergence from General American, as for me this vowel is always raised and ends in a very open position. So the final w is more like a schwa or even aw for me. See, it has a fourth counterpart, duh, but I've only found it in 7 characters, so you can't count past 10,000. This is why the YouTube automatic captioning system struggles with recognizing some of the words I pronounce, especially the word vowel. This realization of mouth is typical to southern US accents, but also Australian English among other varieties.
Can I shoot this guy, or do I talk him down?
He could have had a more powerful immune system.
I definitely didn't used to pronounce this vowel that way. It's a newer development in my accent that happened a few years ago. And we can finish off with rhotic vowels. My near vowel is pretty normal, and so is my square vowel. And these are all Korean finals in which ki appears. Many of them are very rarely used. I do feel that the is slightly higher than in my dress. Someone who pesters others with requests. And encounter a musical pair of automata. The same can be said about start, which for me is slightly raised and also rounded. Started reading Wikipedia articles on obscure features. I had a phase where I entertained the idea of fronting my start vowel like they do in Eastern Canadian accents because I thought it sounded very cute.
That was surprisingly hard.
This dead shark was frolicking in the waters around the harbor in Bay Roberts.
But I didn't end up doing it. Instead, I just put that sound in my conlang. My nurse vowel is around the same quality as my schwa, so nothing special here. But in native words it occurs with a coronal stop as well. And then there's force and north, which I pronounce the same way. Something the language is famous for. 4 Romance languages. And I was under the impression that so does almost every North American. But I've heard so many people say horror and Florida that I'm starting to seriously doubt that.
Peep the horror.
Firefox is just an orange circle now.
For me, that vowel is always the same, and quite high, just like in choice. The final vowel I have to address is, of course, cure. I wasn't sure whether I have this vowel to begin with, since words belonging to this set often end up in the nurse set or the force set, especially considering how high the ladder is for me. But then I asked myself the question, are lore and lure homophones for me? And the answer is 100% no. And I definitely don't say lure either. And so based on that observation, I concluded that I do, in fact, have a separate QR vowel, at least in some words. Easily input obscure characters you use in your conlang. Going back to New York. Obscure, And also, in my accent, the only monophthongs that can occur before an R sound are rhotic vowels. This is something that I thought was pretty obvious until I realized that British people, for example, can put any vowel before R, because they have no rhotic vowels. So they can say mirror and marry and hurry, which for me are mirror and marry and hurry, as in near, square, and nurse. So that's it. That's my accent. And these are all my vowels summarized on one screen. Some of this IPA may not be very accurate since I'm no phonetician, so feel free to suggest your own transcriptions, but, it's all just made up anyway. Just use your ears, bro.